Hey, all these extra prayers are fun, but do we still get to read from the Torah? Oh yeah, more Torah. Greetings, hero. It is I, your friendly neighborhood rabbi, and I'm here today to talk to you about the special Torah and Haftarah readings we have for the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah. Just like the organization of the Parshiot HaShavua, or weekly Torah readings, gives us a different thing to read every single Shabbat, each Jewish holiday also has its own assigned reading for that holiday. And in this video, I'm going to tell you what those are for the first and second day of Rosh Hashanah. That way, if you want to get ahead, you can go ahead and take a look at those, especially if where you are reads in Hebrew and you don't read Hebrew, you'll read it and you'll know what's going on before you get there. You know, the Torah service isn't a test you can fail, but a little extra study never hurt anybody. For the first day of Rosh Hashanah, the story that we read from the Torah is the story of Sarah, the wife of Abraham, conceiving and giving birth to Isaac. Now, lady having a baby, it's always a miracle, but happens all the time. What's the big deal? The big deal was that Sarah was 90 years old at the time. And the bigger deal was that this was a fulfillment of a promise that God made to Abraham. Abraham's trucking along as a 75-year-old man, and God says, "Hey, Abraham." And Abraham's like, "Whoa, God's talking to me." Actually, no, he said, "Here I am, ready for anything. What's up?" And God said, "If you'll be my Abraham, I'll be your God, and everything's going to be cool, and you're going to have a whole bunch of kids." And that may have not been such a big deal, except that Abraham was 75 years old, and his wife was 65, and didn't believe a word of it, but said, "Okay, I'll go along." Fast forward 25 years, maybe slow forward. Abraham's 100, Sarah's 90, and she's having a baby, and it's even more miraculous at 90 than it was at 65. The important thing is that God is keeping God's promise, as implausible as it may have seemed to this couple at the time. And then what that enables is for this blessing that God gave to Abraham to be passed down to successive generations. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been Judaism, it would have been like Abraham's one-time deal. But thanks to God keeping God's promise, Abraham passes it along to Isaac, who then passes it on to his son, and so on. And now we got Judaism. Thanks, Torah. And just like on Shabbat, where we read a section from the Torah and then we read a section from the prophets called the Haftarah, we also have a Haftarah on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and it is this. Sefer Shmuel Aleph, or the first book of Samuel, chapter 1, pretty much the whole thing. This tells the story of the birth of one of our early prophets, Samuel, aka Shmuel. And how this is related to our Torah reading is that Samuel was also the child of a woman who thought she couldn't have children. And this woman's name was Hannah, or Hannah. Unlike Sarah, who had pretty much given up on the idea of having kids with Abraham, Hannah was a younger woman, and her husband had another wife, and she had a mess of kids, and Hannah was really upset about it. So she goes and she prays, and she's considered sort of the exemplar in our tradition of pouring out your heart in prayer. She was so emotional as she was praying that Eli the high priest came along and said, "Woman, you must be drunk. Get your drunk self out of the temple." And she says, "No, I'm praying for a child. And if a miracle happens and I have a child, he will be devoted to the holy service for the rest of his days." Surprise! Samuel comes along, and Hannah, who had prayed her heart out, kept her promise. And she gave Samuel into sort of an internship with the high priest Eli. And Samuel then becomes a prophet who helps Saul become king. And after Saul, David, and this ushers in sort of the reunification of the tribes for the first time in a very long time. So one could say that the Torah reading and the Haftarah reading for the first day of Rosh Hashanah is all about promises being kept. God keeps God's promises to us. We should keep our promises to God and to each other as best we can. And when we fail, we should say we're sorry and make up for it. And that's what Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the 10 days in between remind us to do. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, the reading fast forwards a little bit in the life of Isaac to an unfortunate scene which he almost didn't walk away from. And that is the Akedat Yitzhak, or the binding of Isaac. This tells the story of God calling out to Abraham saying, "I want you to take your only son and sacrifice him." That means, and Abraham's like, "Okay, I don't want to be dismissive. I can't imagine that he took this duty lightly." But Abraham is our exemplar of faith and trust in God, and takes his son to a hilltop, takes out a knife, and is about to shecht him. And in that moment, there is a divine intervention that stops Abraham and says, "Abraham, don't do that. Let him go. Now we know you're serious." But Abraham's like, "All right, I got my knife out and my sacrificing pants on. What am I supposed to do?" And he is pointed to a ram that is conveniently stuck in the pricker bushes nearby. And so, grateful that his son is spared, he takes the ram and sacrifices that in God's honor instead. And that is why some people say today that even though a shofar can be made out of any bovine horn except for a cow, the ideal animal for a shofar is a ram. Because although it didn't end well for the ram, Isaac was in fact spared in this story. And if we want to be spared from judgment, we should remind God of that time with the ram. The Haftarah, or reading from the prophets that we do this day, comes from the book of Jeremiah or Yirmiyahu. And Jeremiah can be kind of a downer for most of it. It's like not pretty. Jeremiah was a prophet that worked in the time of exile and mostly talked about some negative Nelly stuff. However, every once in a while when the people needed it most, Jeremiah would speak up and give them messages of hope. Even though you were in exile, even though we're being oppressed on all sides and things look bleak, in this reading he gives a message of hope, specifically that all exiles from the Holy Land shall be restored and mothers shall be reunited with their children. Children being spared kind of goes along with the Torah reading, and mothers and children being brought together echoes the first day's reading with Sarah and Isaac and Hannah and Samuel. Real quick, on both of those days, there's also something called a Maftir reading. That's like the shortest reading at the end of the Torah readings before the prophets reading, and that's from the book of Numbers, chapter 29, and it just talks about the different sacrifices that are given on the days of Rosh Hashanah. Just want to throw that out there so that you know that that's happening. But now to get back to the mother and child theme, one name we use to call God during a lot of the high holidays, and especially Rosh Hashanah, is Harachaman, the merciful one. And the Hebrew word for mercy, rachamim, seems to contain the root rechem, which is the Hebrew word for womb, W-O-M-B, as in a matrix or uterus. In the Hebrew language, the kind of mercy that God has for us that we like to call upon during our days of repentance is the kind of mercy that a mother would have towards her child. So if you're going into these days of repentance super anxious or worried about judgment and things like that, it's not a bad thing to worry about judgment, but just so you know, the judge that we're praying to for mercy loves us like a mother loves a child. And knowing that, maybe it takes some of the anxiety out of your particular process this year. Hero, that's a lot of information about the Torah. You're going to have to go read it yourself. I'll put the chapter and verse citations in the show notes below, but I'm super excited that you learned this with me today, and I can't wait to see what kind of learning we're going to do together next. If this is the first video of mine that you've seen about Rosh Hashanah, I suggest you go down and click on the first link in the show notes below, or on this pretty orange square down there, and get connected to the 31-day Fall Jewish Holiday Challenge, because there's tons of stuff we're going to learn about. Next time, we're going to talk about tashlich. That's a lot of fun. Throwing bread and water. And until then, hero, peace. Oh yeah, more Torah.